The moment Verona Reynolds spotted the worn leather wallet under the airport bench, she sighed. Another lost item. She had been scrubbing floors for the past 6 hours, and the last thing she wanted was to deal with lost and found. But something about the wallet, the way it lay there, slightly open, revealing a sleek black card inside, made her pause. She picked it up, flipping it open. Inside was a driver's license with a name that meant nothing to her, Zayden Montgomery. His ID photo showed a man with piercing blue eyes, a strong jawline, and a confident expression. There were a few credit cards, crisp $100 bills, and a business card that simply read, Montgomery Enterprises. Verona frowned. That name sounded familiar. Probably some wealthy businessman. He must have been in a hurry and dropped it. She glanced around, but the bustling airport terminal was packed with travelers rushing to their gates. No one seemed to be searching for a missing wallet. With a sigh, she decided to do the right thing. She hurried toward the nearest gate agent. "Excuse me, I found this wallet," she said. "I think the owner might still be in the airport." Before the agent could respond, a deep voice cut in. "That would be mine." Verona turned and nearly dropped the wallet. Zayden Montgomery was even more striking in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impossibly expensive-looking suit, he exuded power and confidence. His gaze locked onto her, and for a split second, she forgot how to breathe. She quickly handed him the wallet. "Here." He took it, flipping it open to check the contents. Then his piercing blue eyes met hers again. "You didn't take anything." Verona scoffed. "Why would I?" His lips quirked up slightly. "Most people would." "Well, I'm not most people," she shot back, crossing her arms. For a moment, he just studied her as if trying to figure her out. Then, to her shock, he pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills and handed them to her. "For your honesty." Verona's eyes widened. "I don't need your money." His brow lifted. "You work here, don't you?" She bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said smoothly. "Just that most people wouldn't turn down free cash." "Yeah, well, I do," she said firmly, stepping back. "Have a nice day, Mr. Montgomery." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." She glanced over her shoulder. He hesitated for half a second, just long enough for her to catch the flicker of something in his eyes. Interest. Amusement. Curiosity. "Let me buy you a coffee." She blinked. "What?" "You did me a favor," he said. "Let me return it." Verona hesitated. Something about this man set off every warning bell in her head. He was too confident, too polished, too out of her league. But there was something undeniably magnetic about him. And, well, she could really use a coffee. "Fine," she said cautiously. "One coffee." A few minutes later, they were seated at an airport cafe, and Verona was still trying to figure out how she had ended up here. "So, you don't know who I am?" Zayden asked, sipping his espresso. She shrugged. "Should I?" He chuckled. "Most people do." "Well, I don't keep up with the lives of rich guys who lose their wallets," she said dryly. His grin widened. "Fair enough." Something about him was frustratingly charming. He asked her about her job, her life, and actually listened when she spoke. Most men barely gave her the time of day, but Zayden seemed genuinely interested. "So, what do you do?" she asked, just to be polite. He leaned back in his chair. "I own Montgomery Enterprises." She nearly choked on her coffee. "Wait, the Montgomery Enterprises. The one and only." Verona stared at him. "You own half of the city." "Not quite half," he said, amused. She shook her head. "And you're sitting here having coffee with an airport janitor?" His expression softened. "I'm having coffee with the woman who returned my wallet when she could have taken everything inside it." Something warm spread through her chest. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her like she mattered. And that was dangerous. Because Zayden Montgomery was the kind of man who could turn a woman's world upside down. Zayden watched Verona with a kind of fascination he wasn't used to feeling. She wasn't swooning over his name, wasn't trying to impress him, and wasn't interested in his money. It was refreshing. He leaned forward slightly, studying her. "So, what's your story?" Verona hesitated, stirring her coffee. "Not much to tell. I find that hard to believe." She exhaled, debating how much to share. "I grew up here. Dropped out of college when my mom got sick. Been working ever since." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you don't resent that?" She shrugged. "Resenting it won't change anything." That answer intrigued him. Most people would have launched into a tragic monologue. but she was pragmatic. There was no self-pity in her voice. "You're different," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Because I work an honest job?" "No, because you don't let it define you." That caught her off guard. For a moment, she just looked at him as if trying to figure him out the way he was doing with her. "So, what about you?" she asked. "What's it like being you?" He chuckled at her choice of words. "Exhausting most days. Everyone wants something. Must be nice to have everything." His gaze darkened slightly. "You'd be surprised how lonely it can be." That wasn't the answer she expected. Before she could respond, an announcement rang out over the intercom, calling his flight for boarding. She set her cup down, pushing her chair back. "Well, you should probably go." He didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "Come to dinner with me." She blinked. "What?" "Tomorrow night. I'll send a car." She frowned. "You don't even know me." "I'd like to." Everything about this was surreal. Just an hour ago, she had been scrubbing floors, and now a billionaire was asking her to dinner like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her instincts told her to walk away, to say no. But there was something about the way he looked at her, like she was more than just the woman who had returned his wallet. Against her better judgment, she took the card. "I'll think about it," she said. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'll take that as a yes." She rolled her eyes but didn't correct him. As he walked away, she stared down at the card in her hand. What was she getting herself into? The next evening, a sleek black car pulled up outside her tiny apartment. Verona hesitated in the doorway, gripping her coat tightly. This was insane. She had no business stepping into a world like his. But something pulled her forward, and before she knew it, she was sliding into the car. The ride was smooth, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Her nerves twisted tighter with every passing block. When they pulled up to an exclusive restaurant, she hesitated for a beat before stepping out. The moment she walked inside, she felt out of place. The chandeliers, the hushed conversations, the scent of expensive wine, it was a world she didn't belong in. Then she spotted him. Zayden stood near a private table, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal a luxury watch. The moment his eyes landed on her, something in his expression shifted. He stood, pulling out a chair for her. "You came." Apparently. He looked utterly unbothered by the fact that they were from two different worlds. As soon as she sat down, a waiter appeared with a bottle of wine, pouring it without asking. She picked up the glass but hesitated. "You didn't ask if I drink." Zayden's lips twitched. "Do you?" "Not often." "Then we'll order something else." She narrowed her eyes. "You always this accommodating?" "Only when I want someone to stay." She ignored the way her pulse jumped at that. The dinner was unlike anything she'd experienced. Every dish was plated like art and the conversation flowed effortlessly. At some point, she realized she was actually enjoying herself. Until a woman approached the table. Blonde, statuesque, dressed in a designer gown that probably cost more than Verona made in a year. She rested a manicured hand on Zayden's shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here." His polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "Cassandra." Verona stiffened. The woman turned to her, eyes scanning her like she was an anomaly. "And you are?" Before Verona could answer, Zayden's voice cut in. "She's with me." The way he said it left no room for argument. Cassandra's perfect lips curved slightly. "Interesting." Without another word, she walked away, leaving a tension in her wake. Verona set her fork down. Something like that." She exhaled, shaking her head. This was a mistake. Zayden's expression hardened. "Why?" "Because I don't belong here." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Says who?" She gestured around. "This place. That woman. The fact that I don't own a single thing that would fit in here." He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table. "A key." She frowned. "What's that?" "An invitation." "To what?" "To see that you don't need to belong anywhere." "You already do." Her heart pounded. She didn't know what was more dangerous, the way he looked at her or the fact that she wanted to believe him. Verona sat rigidly in the plush leather seat of Zayden's car, the city lights flickering through the tinted windows as they drove away from the restaurant. Her fingers clenched around the key he had given her, its cool weight pressing into her palm. She still wasn't sure why she had accepted it, why she had even gotten into this car instead of walking away like she had planned. Zayden sat beside her, his posture relaxed, one hand resting casually on his knee. He hadn't spoken since they left, giving her space to process whatever was running through her mind. But she could feel his gaze on her, intense and unwavering. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, she turned to him. "Where are we going?" His voice was calm, steady. "Somewhere I want you to see." That told her nothing, but she didn't press him. It wasn't like she had anywhere else to be. The car eventually pulled up in front of a towering glass building. Verona stared up at it, her stomach tightening. The sleek, modern structure was all sharp edges and reflective surfaces, standing in stark contrast to the world she knew. The driver opened her door and she stepped out hesitantly. Zayden joined her, leading her inside without a word. The lobby was quiet, the air faintly scented with expensive cologne and polished wood. Verona had never been anywhere like this before. The elevator ride was silent, tension thick between them. When the doors slid open, she followed him down a dimly lit hallway. He stopped in front of a door and gestured for her to use the key. Her pulse quickened. "What is this place?" "Open it and see." She hesitated before sliding the key into the lock. The door clicked open, revealing an expansive penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering city below, casting soft reflections on the marble floors. The space was elegant yet minimalistic, with dark furniture and subtle accents of gold. Verona stepped inside cautiously, taking it all in. It was the kind of place that belonged in glossy magazines, not in her reality. Zayden leaned against the doorway, watching her. "This is where I live." Her head snapped toward him. "Why are you showing me this?" He exhaled slowly, as if carefully choosing his words. "Because I want you to understand something." She crossed her arms, waiting. He stepped further inside, his voice quieter now. "I didn't grow up in a place like this." That surprised her. She had assumed he had always been wealthy, that luxury had been his reality from birth. "My father built Montgomery Enterprises from the ground up," he continued. "I watched him work himself into the grave, trying to prove something to people who never cared. When I took over, I told myself I wouldn't do the same." Verona listened, unsure where he was going with this. "But somewhere along the way I became exactly what I swore I wouldn't," he admitted. "Someone who only exists in places like this." She frowned. "You say that like it's a bad thing." His jaw tightened slightly. "When you walked into that restaurant tonight, I saw how out of place you felt. I felt that way too. More times than I can count." She stared at him, taken aback. It had never occurred to her that someone like him could feel like an outsider in his own world. "I brought you here because I want you to see that I wasn't always the man who fits into places like that," he said. "And I don't want you thinking that just because I live in a world like this, you don't belong in it." Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "You barely know me." His eyes held hers, unwavering. "I know enough." That was the problem. He was looking at her like she was something rare, something worth knowing. And she wasn't sure she could handle that. She turned away, walking toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below, a sea of lights and movement. "I don't know what you expect from me, Zayden." He was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Nothing." She inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. "Then why am I here?" His voice was softer this time. "Because you didn't walk away." That hit her harder than it should have. She turned back to face him, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. He was standing closer now, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I should go," she said, but the words came out unconvincing, as if she wasn't sure she meant them. Zayden didn't stop her. He simply nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. But as she reached the door, she hesitated. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone saw her. Not as a worker, not as someone struggling to get by, but as something more. And that terrified her. Without another word, she stepped out of the penthouse, leaving Zayden standing alone in the quiet. Verona stood outside the towering building, her breath uneven. The night air was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the heat rushing through her. She should have left the moment she stepped into that penthouse. She should have walked away before this became something she couldn't control. But she hadn't, and that terrified her more than anything. A sleek car pulled up beside her, the driver stepping out to open the door. Zayden had thought of everything, of course. Even in her departure, he made sure she was taken care of. She hesitated for a moment before getting inside, the city blurring past her as the car pulled away. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Her mind kept replaying every moment, every look, every charged silence between them. She had been around powerful men before, customers who barely acknowledged her existence, who saw her as nothing more than a background figure in their lives. But Zayden saw her, and that was dangerous. The next morning, she arrived at the airport for her shift, trying to push the night before out of her mind. Routine was safe. Routine didn't make her heart race or leave her questioning everything. She had barely begun her work when she felt it, that unmistakable awareness pricking at her senses. She turned, and there he was, Zayden Montgomery, standing in the middle of the airport terminal like he belonged there, like this wasn't the last place a man like him should be. He was dressed more casually today, though even in a tailored button-down and slacks, he commanded attention. Her pulse kicked up as he approached, his stride purposeful. "You tracked me down at work?" she asked before he could speak. He didn't look the least bit guilty. "I didn't like how we left things." "There was nothing to leave," she countered, gripping the handle of her mop tightly. He glanced down at it, then back at her. "You don't believe that?" She exhaled sharply. "Zayden." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Come with me." She blinked. "I'm working." "For how much longer?" She frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm not leaving without you." She should have said no. She should have ignored the way her heart flipped at his words. But the intensity in his eyes, the way he stood there like a man who had made up his mind, left her speechless. Against her better judgment, she nodded. An hour later, she found herself in the back seat of his car again, this time driving out of the city. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. He glanced at her. "Somewhere quieter." She didn't question him further. She should have, but deep down, she didn't want to. When the car finally stopped, she looked out the window and inhaled sharply. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of them, waves crashing against the shore. The private stretch of beach was untouched, the sand smooth under the golden light of the afternoon sun. She turned to him. "You brought me to the ocean?" He watched her reaction closely. "You told me once you'd never seen it." She had, in passing, mentioned it to him at dinner, not thinking much of it. And yet, here they were. A lump formed in her throat. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you say." Her chest tightened. He stepped out of the car, holding the door open for her. "Come on." She hesitated before slipping off her shoes and stepping onto the sand. The warmth of it between her toes sent an unexpected thrill through her. Zayden walked beside her as they neared the water, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I didn't bring you here to impress you." She glanced at him. "Then why?" He exhaled. "Because I wanted you to see what it feels like to have someone listen." She swallowed past the lump in her throat. The waves lapped at her feet, cool and refreshing. She stared out at the horizon, the vastness of it making her feel both small and infinite at the same time. Zayden suddenly reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver up her spine. "I don't care where you come from, Verona," he said, his voice low. "I don't care what you do. I just care that you're here." Her breath hitched. This was real. This wasn't some fleeting moment, some passing fascination. This was a man who had the world in his hands, choosing to stand here with her. And for the first time, she let herself believe it. She turned to face him fully. "I don't know how to do this." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Then let me show you." The vulnerability in his expression undid her. And when he leaned in, closing the space between them, she didn't pull away. She let herself fall. Verona stood at the water's edge, her hands still entwined with Zayden's. The ocean stretched before them, vast and unyielding, mirroring the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She had never imagined herself here, in this moment, standing beside a man who had effortlessly shattered every expectation she had about the wealthy and powerful. Zayden's fingers tightened around hers, his warmth grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't rush her, didn't push. He simply waited, letting the silence settle between them like a shared secret. She exhaled, watching as a wave rolled in and lapped at her feet. "This shouldn't make sense." His voice was steady. "But it does." She turned to him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. There was none. His blue eyes held nothing but certainty, as if he had already made peace with whatever this was becoming. You don't even know me, she said, though the words lacked conviction. I know enough, he countered. I know you don't take what isn't yours even when no one's watching. I know you don't let circumstances define you. And I know that when you talk about your life, you do it without bitterness. That says more than any introduction ever could. Her throat tightened. No one had ever looked at her like this before. Like she was something worth knowing. The wind carried the scent of salt and something else, something unspoken that hung heavy between them. She wanted to trust him, but the fear of falling too hard, too fast, clenched in her chest like a vice. I don't need saving, she said after a long pause. I'm not trying to save you. His voice was calm, assured. I just want to know you. The sincerity in his tone unraveled something inside her. She had spent years keeping people at a distance, building walls to protect herself from disappointments and empty promises. But Zayden wasn't making promises. He was simply asking her to let him in. She turned back to the waves, watching as they rose and crashed, relentless in their pursuit of the shore. Finally, she spoke. You don't live in my world. And you don't live in mine, he acknowledged. But that doesn't mean we can't find something in between. She wanted to believe him. And against every instinct telling her to walk away, she let herself take one step closer. The drive back to the city was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Verona sat beside Zayden, her fingers resting lightly on the car's armrest. He didn't push for conversation, allowing her to process everything in her own time. By the time they reached her apartment, night had fully settled over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets. The car came to a smooth stop, and for a moment neither of them moved. Verona turned to him. This is where I get out. He nodded, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. Will I see you again? She hesitated. She had spent so much of her life running from things that felt too good to be true. But Zayden wasn't a fantasy. He was standing right in front of her, waiting for her to decide. Instead of answering, she reached for the door handle. But just before stepping out, she glanced back at him. His gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. And then, before she could change her mind, she said, probably. A slow smile touched his lips, not triumphant, not arrogant. Just patient. She stepped out, closing the door behind her, but even as she walked toward her building, she could still feel the weight of his presence. Something told her this wasn't the end. The next few days passed in a blur. Verona threw herself into work, trying to ignore the way her thoughts constantly drifted back to Zayden. She told herself that it was just curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, she knew better. Late one evening, as she finished her shift, she stepped into the airport's break room and froze. Sitting on the small, worn couch was Zayden, completely out of place in his expensive suit, casually flipping through a magazine as if he had all the time in the world. Her pulse kicked up. What are you doing here? He set the magazine down, meeting her gaze with ease. Waiting for you. She glanced around, half expecting her coworkers to appear and gawk at the billionaire sitting in their dingy break room. You do realize this isn't exactly your usual scene, right? He leaned back, completely unbothered. Maybe I'm expanding my horizons. Despite herself, she bit back a smile. You're impossible. He stood, closing the distance between them. I have a proposition. Her brows lifted. Should I be worried? His lips twitched. Possibly. She crossed her arms. Let's hear it. I have an event this weekend, he said. It's formal. Black tie. And I need a date. She frowned. You don't strike me as the kind of man who has trouble finding a date. I don't, he admitted. But I don't want just anyone. I want you. Her heart stuttered. He continued, his voice calm but firm. Come with me. She exhaled, shaking her head. Zayden, I don't belong at something like that. He stepped closer. Who says? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Before she could protest further, he added, Say yes. She looked up at him, at the quiet certainty in his gaze. And against every instinct telling her to say no, she found herself nodding. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his face, but he didn't push further. I'll send everything you need, he said simply. And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the break room, wondering what she had just agreed to. 2 days later, a sleek black box arrived at her door. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue, was the most breathtaking gown she had ever seen. Her fingers brushed over the fabric, her breath catching. And in that moment, she realized something. Zayden Montgomery wasn't just inviting her into his world. He was daring her to believe she belonged in it. Verona stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The gown clung to her curves in a way that felt both foreign and intoxicating, the deep emerald color making her skin glow under the soft light of her apartment. She barely recognized herself. The fabric was smooth beneath her fingertips, the intricate beading catching the light with every movement. It was the kind of dress that belonged in a world she had never stepped into, a world where chandeliers sparkled overhead and champagne flowed endlessly. A knock at the door made her pulse quicken. She turned, smoothing the dress one last time before opening it. Zayden stood there, looking impossibly refined in a tailored black tuxedo. His sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes made it impossible to look away. He studied her for a moment, his gaze traveling over her with something unreadable. "You look stunning," he said, his voice quieter than usual. A warmth spread through her chest, unexpected and dangerous. "You're not so bad yourself." His lips curved slightly, but he didn't tease. Instead, he held out his arm. "Shall we?" She hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine, but she ignored it, focusing instead on steadying her breath. The car ride to the event was smooth, the city lights flickering past as they drove through the heart of downtown. Verona kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to ignore the nervous energy thrumming through her. Zayden glanced at her. "You don't have to be nervous," she exhaled slowly. "That's easy for you to say. You belong in places like this." He turned slightly, his voice firm. "So do you." She didn't respond, unsure of how to argue with a man who seemed to believe in her more than she believed in herself. When they arrived, the entrance was lined with photographers, their cameras flashing in rapid succession as guests stepped out of their cars. Verona stiffened, suddenly hyper-aware of the weight of this moment. Zayden's hand found hers, his grip steady. "Just look at me," he murmured. She did, and somehow it made everything easier. They stepped into the grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers hung high above, casting a golden glow over the space. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the air buzzed with quiet conversations and soft laughter. Zayden guided her through the room with practiced ease, nodding at familiar faces as they passed. Verona felt the weight of curious gazes on her, whispers exchanged behind jeweled hands. A tall man approached, his features sharp with an air of authority. He extended a hand to Zayden with a knowing smile. "Montgomery, I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." Zayden shook his hand, his tone even. "Wouldn't miss it." The man's attention shifted to Verona, his eyes assessing. "And who is this?" Zayden didn't hesitate. "Verona. Just her name. No explanations, no justifications. As if that alone was enough." The man nodded, though curiosity flickered in his gaze. "Pleasure." As he walked away, Verona exhaled slowly. "They're all wondering who I am." Zayden turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Let them." Before she could respond, another figure approached. Cassandra. Her icy blue gown shimmered under the chandelier light, her expression poised as she came to a stop before them. "I should have known you'd make an entrance," she said, her gaze flicking briefly to Verona before settling on Zayden. "You always did like surprises." Zayden's grip on Verona's waist tightened slightly. "Cassandra." She tilted her head, her smile cool. "And you must be the reason Zayden has been so preoccupied lately." Verona met her gaze without flinching. "Something like that." Cassandra studied her for a moment before letting out a quiet chuckle. "Interesting." Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Verona exhaled sharply. "She doesn't like me." Zayden's voice was calm but firm. "I don't care." Something about the way he said it sent a thrill through her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Zayden never strayed far, his presence a steady anchor amid the overwhelming grandeur of it all. At some point, they ended up on the balcony, the city stretching endlessly below. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the heat of the ballroom. Zayden turned to her. "Was it as terrible as you expected?" She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not terrible, just surreal." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I meant what I said before, Verona. You belong here, Not because of the dress or the setting, but because of who you are. Her throat tightened. I don't know if I believe that yet. His gaze softened. Then I'll believe it for you. The sincerity in his voice unraveled something inside her. She took a breath, steadying herself. Why me, Zayden? He didn't hesitate. Because you see me in a way no one else does. She swallowed hard. And in that moment, she knew she was falling. She didn't fight it. Instead, she stepped closer. Zayden reached for her, his fingers brushing against hers before finally settling on her waist. His touch was warm, grounding. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring every second. The city blurred around them, the world fading until there was only them. And for the first time, Verona let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged right where she was. Months later, standing on the very same balcony, Zayden pulled something from his pocket. A small velvet box. Verona's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring that glittered under the soft city lights. Zayden's voice was steady, unwavering. Marry me. Tears pricked at her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't hesitate. Yes. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and as he kissed her, she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. Not just in his world, but in his arms. Forever.